Hello everyone, I cordially welcome you all to another video from the React tutorial series, and in this video we are going to discuss on use context hook in React. So without any delay, let's get started. So let's discuss about the context in React. So if you have watched one of our previous videos where we have discussed on this topic, context in React, you are already familiar with this slide. But if you haven't watched, let me repeat this for you. So in one of our previous videos, we have also discussed regarding props, and we have also discussed why props are beneficial. So basically props stands for properties. They are read-only in nature and are used to pass data from the parent component to the child component. And the child component can accept this data and render dynamic content. But now consider an example. Suppose you have three components, component A, component B and component C. Now component A is the parent of component B and component B is the parent of component C. Now suppose you have to pass some data from the component A to component C. Component B has nothing to do with the data. So using props, how can you do it? By using props, what you can do, you can pass the data from component A to component B as props and pass the same data down the hierarchy from component B to C as props. Finally, component C will consume the data, okay? But here you are doing one redundant work. You are passing the data to component B, which has nothing to do with the data which is being sent from component A. So here for three different layers, you are doing one redundant prop sending, okay? So now if you have 20 to 30 nested components, imagine if you want to send some data from the topmost component to the bottommost component, what will happen? Basically from component 1, you will be keep on sending the data as props till the second last component, and finally from the second last component, you will send the data as props to the last component. Here our primary focus should be the parent component should send the data to the desired child component, but the component which are in the middle must not get the data because that is redundant. So here what happens, as using props, you have no way by which you can avoid the sending data to the intermediate components. Context basically helps us to remove this. Using context in React, we can specify some data in the parent component, and then that data can be accessed via any child component, no matter wherever in the component tree that component lies. It may be anywhere in the DOM tree. So I will request you to watch that video on context because that will clear your concept to a great extent about what are context in React, how they are beneficial and how they solve the problem of props drilling. Okay. So we come to the main topic for today, that is use context in React. So use context is basically a hook which is provided in React to consume the context data. To utilize the concept of context in React's functional component, firstly we have to import createContext method from React and create a context using the createContext method. So in the next two lines you can see how do we do that. We import createContext from React and thereafter we are saying const profile context equal to createContext and some value. Once we have created the context, we have to provide the context to the child component. By doing this, we can pass context data deeply into the component tree. Now when we utilize any context data using the use context hook, React searches the immediate parent component in the component tree and goes up the hierarchy until it finds the particular context provider for the particular context. So as I have already said, this use context hook is basically used to consume the data which is provided by the React context in the parent component. So when you use the use context hook in any child component, it keeps on looking up the DOM tree and searches to find any provider, and by doing it, it reaches the topmost component in the component tree, and there it will surely find some provider. Here one thing which you should make a note of, to whichever component you provide the context, your context data will be available to the components which are below that component. That is, those components should be child component of the component where you have provided the context. The components which are parent to the component will never have any access to that context data. Always remember this. Only child component in the DOM tree have access to context data. The parent components don't. Okay. Now we have done enough of theory. Let's go to VS Code and understand by an example. Here, as you can see in VS Code, I have created a file known as useContextHook, and within it I have created a profile component which is a functional component. And as you are already aware by now, the hooks which are provided by React are used in functional components and not in class components. And why I am emphasizing on functional components, this is so because in the current versions of React it is always recommendable to use functional components rather than class components. They are not only easier to maintain but also easier to unit test, easier to understand and easier to debug. Okay, so finally let's discuss how we are implementing the useContextHook in React. So let's start with the parent component. Here our app component acts as a parent component. Here first of all I have defined a dummy data, a dummy user object which contains name, age and designation. Finally we have created a context and exported it, and we have named it as profile context. And this create context accepts one argument. Here we are passing this dummy object which we have created for data. Okay. Thereafter within our app component, as I have already told, we have to provide the context. So this context has a property that it used to provide the context. So profile context dot provider. Thereafter we specify the value. So here we are using this dummy user object to pass this data, and thereafter we have closed this profile context dot provider. Within it we have our profile component, that is our child component. So now we have provided this user data to our child component. So now the question comes how our child component basically consumes the data. Let's see. In our useContextHook file we have our profile component. Here first of all we have imported the useContextHook from React and the profile context from the parent app component. Okay, and thereafter we are initializing a variable user and we are setting the data to it. Now the main question, how do we consume the context? We write useContextHook and within this we provide the context we want to consume. So here our context is known as profile context. So here I have written use context and it accepts one argument, that is the profile context. Now this user has access to this data. Okay, and if you have any method to update that data, that is also accessible within this user in the child component. Finally we have displayed the username, user age and user designation within our JSX and returned it. Finally we have exported our child component. Okay. So if everything should work, what will happen when you run this component? Basically this data will be provided to the child component. This child component using the useContextHook will consume this profile context and get its data and members in user. And finally we will display the user's properties like name, age and designation which we have set in the parent component within our child component. So let's run our code and see if it's working. So we will go to terminal and write npm start to bootstrap our React application. So let's wait for some time until our application starts. So as you can see, our application has started, and as desired we can see the name, the age and the designation on the UI. Okay. So this is how we implement the context in React, and we use this useContextHook in functional components to consume the data which is provided by the context. Okay. So let's go back to our slide. I hope you found this video informative. In case you like it, feel free to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We are going to bring more videos in the future. For any queries, doubts, suggestions or feedbacks, feel free to post them in the comment section. We are going to reply. So thank you for now. See you in the next video. Bye.